Right now, somewhere in your house, there's a pilot light burning that you've never once thought about. A little blue flame behind glass, keeping your water hot, your stove ready. You didn't light it. You don't tend it. You've probably never even seen it. And that gap, the fact that fire is just there for you, waiting, silent, guaranteed, is one of the strangest luxuries a human has ever had. Because for most of our history, that flame was the single most fragile thing your entire tribe owned. Strip that away for a second. Picture a group of maybe 30 people somewhere on a cold plain 60,000 years ago, and picture the one thing standing between them and the dark. A heap of embers glowing under ash, kept alive since nobody alive can remember when. Now picture that heap going cold. Not a metaphor, actually cold, gray, dead. That is one of the worst things that could happen to a Paleolithic group, and it wasn't rare. It happened. Rain got in, someone got careless. A storm ran for 3 days straight, and when it happened, there was no drawer with a lighter in it. There was no backup. Because here's the part that doesn't get said enough. Early humans were not reliably good at making fire from scratch. Friction, fire, the hand drill, the bow drill, it's brutal, slow, and it fails constantly, especially with damp wood or cold hands. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence from hunter-gatherer groups studied in the last 2 centuries shows something telling. Some of them didn't bother trying to spark new fire at all. They just never let the old fire die. Groups in places like Tasmania and parts of the Andaman Islands were recorded relying almost entirely on carrying embers rather than generating new flame. Because generating new flame was the unreliable option, not the safe one. Losing your fire didn't mean an inconvenient evening. It could mean days without cooked food, without warmth, without the smoke that kept insects and predators at a distance. It could mean people died in a single hard week. So somebody had to make sure that never happened. And that's the job we're circling. Because in almost every early human society we have evidence for, there was one role that could not fail, could not be handed off carelessly, could not be forgotten about for a night. The keeper of the fire, not a ceremonial title, a survival post. Think about what that means for a second. An entire community's future resting nightly on one person staying alert while everyone else slept. That's not a chore. That's closer to what we'd now call an on-call life support technician, except the patient is the whole tribe, and there's no hospital to transfer them to if you mess it up. There are, by most reconstructions, at least 4 separate skills this one job demanded, and each one on its own could break the whole system if it failed. Feeding the fire without smothering it, reading the wood, since wet wood, resin-heavy wood, and green wood all behave differently and unpredictably. Watching it through the night, every night, because embers can go from glowing to ash in a few unattended hours, and knowing how to rebuild it fast if disaster hit anyway. 4 jobs, 1 person, 0 room for a bad night's sleep. Start with feeding it, because this is where most people assume the danger sits, and they're wrong in a way that's almost funny. You'd think the risk is the fire going out. It's actually the opposite. Too much fuel, packed on too fast, and you don't get a bigger fire. You get a fire that burns through everything in an hour and leaves you with nothing by midnight. The keeper had to ration fuel like a budget, small increments, timed carefully, judged by eye in the dark, because overfeeding a fire was its own kind of failure, just a slower, quieter one that you wouldn't notice until it was too late to fix. And that rationing problem gets worse the second you factor in what kind of wood they were rationing. Not all fuel behaves the same, and that difference could undo a whole night's careful work. Green wood hisses and smokes and barely burns. Resin-heavy wood flares hot and fast and burns out quick. Dense hardwood holds a slow ember for hours if it's managed right. The keeper wasn't just tossing sticks on a pile. They were reading the wood the way you'd read an ingredient label, deciding blend by blend what would get them through to sunrise. Get that wrong, and it doesn't just die. It can die in a way where the coals collapse into powder, and powder can't be revived. Ash isn't a pause button. Ash is the end of the file, which is exactly why the actual watching mattered so much more than it sounds like it should. This wasn't glancing over occasionally. In reconstructions of hearth use, from sites in Europe and the Near East, some of the most well-preserved ancient hearths, including layers found at sites like Kabara Cave in Israel, show evidence of sustained, structured, long-term fire maintenance across generations. Not sporadic use, not accidental survival. Sustained. That word matters. It implies discipline, rotation, someone always awake, always checking, night after night, for years. Not one hero. A lineage of people who never let their guard down, because the one night they did was the night that erased the fire that had outlived their grandparents. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because you'd assume the danger was mostly about cold, about warmth. That's the surface problem. The deeper one is darker. Fire wasn't just heat. It was the only reliable barrier between a sleeping group and whatever was moving in the dark beyond the light. Predators avoided flame. Insects avoided smoke. The moment that fire dimmed past a certain point, the perimeter of safety shrank with it. Literally, physically, the radius of light contracting toward the huddled bodies at the center. So the keeper wasn't managing comfort. They were managing the actual visible border between the tribe and the predators. And that's the part that reframes the whole job, because it means a bad night for the firekeeper wasn't just "will be cold tomorrow." It was "the dark gets closer tonight." That single realization is why some anthropologists argue this role, more than hunting, more than tool making, might be one of the earliest examples of a specialized, trusted, high-stakes profession in human history. Not everyone got picked for it. It required someone with proven attentiveness, someone who'd already shown they could be trusted not to fall asleep at the wrong hour, because the entire group's night depended on one person's discipline holding. Here's the twist most people don't expect though, and it's the one worth sitting with. You'd think the failure mode was rare, catastrophic, something that happened once in a generation. It wasn't. Ethnographic accounts of fire loss among groups without reliable friction fire methods describe something almost mundane. Tribes sometimes traveling long distances specifically to borrow embers from a neighboring group after their own fire died, sometimes making that trip a normal, expected part of survival, not an emergency story told once and never again. In other words, fire failure wasn't the exception that proved the rule. For long stretches of human history, keeping fire alive artificially was actually harder and rarer than simply never letting it go out in the first place. The keep it burning forever strategy wasn't superstition. It was the smarter bet, mathematically, against the alternative, which means the fourth skill, rebuilding fire from nothing when the impossible happened anyway, was almost a last resort, a skill kept in reserve for the day the system failed despite everything. And when it did fail, the cost wasn't abstract. It meant hours, sometimes a full day or more, of frantic friction-based effort in the cold, hoping for a spark before hypothermia, before predators, before hunger made the decision for you. That's the stress this one job carried every single night, for years, on repeat, for the entire span of a human life. Now, sit with the number, because this is where it stops being ancient trivia and becomes something closer to vertigo. Modern humans have been managing fire, in some capacity, for at least 400,000 years, with strong, direct evidence of controlled, sustained hearths going back roughly 100,000 years at multiple sites across Africa and Eurasia. That means somewhere on the order of 4,000 generations of people whose nightly survival depended on someone, somewhere, staying awake, watching embers, rationing fuel, reading wood grain by firelight, and refusing to fall asleep at the wrong hour. 4,000 generations of that pressure, compressed into instinct, compressed into bodies, compressed into the exact bodies sitting here now. Because here's the quiet part. That job never actually ended. It just changed shape completely, and nobody updated the manual. You still check the stove twice before leaving the house. You still feel a small jolt of alarm at the smell of smoke you can't immediately place. You still, without ever being taught to, glance toward a flickering light in the dark and feel your attention lock onto it instead of drifting away. None of that is random. None of that is anxiety in the clinical sense. That's 4,000 generations of firekeepers, still on shift, still doing the one job they were never allowed to fail at. Except now the fire is a pilot light behind glass, and the tribe is just you, standing in your kitchen, checking a stove that was never actually going to go out.